Good morning, and welcome to the National Invasive Species Awareness Week webinar series hosted by the Southern IPM Center and sponsored by University of Florida, Texas AgriLife Extension, Auburn University, and University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. Today we are proud to present Fudd Graham speaking on Tawny Crazy Ants. There's a reason we call them crazy.
Thanks, Joe. Before I get started, the first thing I would like to do, you thank some people. I would like to thank Paul Nestor at Texas A&M, Faith Oy at Florida, Joe McGowan at Mississippi State, and Danny McDonald at Sam Houston State. About a year ago, we found out that we had Tawny, well, at that point in time, there were just crazy ants in Mississippi, and decided that we needed to get out and talk to some of our producers and our stakeholders out there to let them know what they might be dealing with in the future. We did find the crazy ants in Alabama about a month later, but I did not have anything to show or to talk to these people about. And these individuals were kind enough to loan me photos, PowerPoints, movies, and data from where they had been working, and I'm going to present some of their information today. So let's get started and go on into the crazy ants. And what we ran into when we first started working with these critters is this. Along the Florida Panhandle and the northern part of the Gulf, we were working, and these are the first crazy ants that I ever saw in Louisiana, with what we call the hairy crazy ant. In Florida, they were dealing with the Caribbean crazy ant. And in Texas, they were dealing with the Rasberry Crazy Ant. And basically we had three pockets of what we thought were subspecies of ants that no one could agree upon what ant we were working on. So what I want to start out doing is talk a little bit about where these guys come from and how they got here and what they did before they got here. These ants are native to Brazil, and we had in Colombia what we call a very progressive farmer that decided he wanted to bring in an aggressive species that was would come in and work as a biocontrol agent in his coffee and cattle areas on his farm. Very quickly, these ants developed a mutualistic association with mealybugs. What they liked was that honeydew that was produced by the mealybugs. On the right, you can see fire ants that we have here attending mealybugs, and basically they farm the honeydew, use it for food, plus they protect the mealybugs and keep the other predators and parasites that attack them from harming them. This got so bad in Colombia that they protected the ground pearls and the aphids so well that during a drought they contributed to the complete desiccation of pastures in Colombia. They also blinded calves, preyed on small animals, birds, and they deaths were attributed to asphyxiation. The ants just overwhelmed them. The larger animals got attacked around the eyes, around the nose, and around the hooves. These guys in Colombia had incredible population densities. They became formidable household pests. They came in and just basically overwhelmed the structure. They were ecologically dominant there. They monopolized all the food sources, taking away from other ants, and basically decreased the species richness in the area where they were located. There were some good things that came out of that, though. The Colombian researchers that looked at them found out that if you used IPM principles and used sanitation, cleaned up areas where the ants would hide, where they could nest, and cleaned up their food sources such as aphids and things like that, that you could reduce the population using these practices. And it took about 20 years in that particular ecosystem, and I want to point that out, just that ecosystem, for them to reach equilibrium with the other species there. But it was easy for them to make a hop, skip, and a jump and to land in Florida, which is where they first came into the United States in around 1953. They landed in Miami-Dade County there and just sort of hung out for a while. They didn't cause much problems in. 1990s in Miami, they were found in a hospital and some commercial buildings later in the 90s. Boca Raton found some, and some showed up in greenhouses in Washington, D.C. in 1984. It wasn't until around the early 2000s that they began to cause major problems down in Florida. And that's about the time that the Rasberry Crazy Ants began to explode in Texas. These were discovered first by a pest control operator named Tom Rasberry near Pasadena, Texas. Tom was worked with them. He is one of the main people that try to control them around Houston, Texas. 2005, he found a second population with very large densities in a residential landscape. And Tom is they call them Rasberry Crazy Ants, which was basically great publicity for his pest control company. And he was one of the ones that was really, really upset when we changed the name of this creature to the Tawny Crazy Ant. This occurred in 2012. We had been calling the population here in Texas the Rasberry Crazy Ant. Those we found along the northern Gulf, the hairy crazy ant, and they were Caribbean crazy ant in Florida. I'm not going to give you the genus and species names of these because they were all subspecies. They had more letters, but you don't need to know that. But what happened was Gotzik and his collaborators went and collected Rasberry Crazy Ants in Texas, some of the other ants in Louisiana, some in Florida, and also went to where these ants originated in South America and collected some. And what they determined through their research is that all of these ants are the same species, and so they named the Rasberry Crazy Ant Nylanderia fulva, as opposed to the Nylanderia fulva pubens that they call it in Florida. I will get this right in just a second. So the new name for the Rasberry Crazy Ant and all of these ants across the southeast is Nylanderia fulva Mare, and it was found done here that Gotzik did in 2012. About a year or so later, David Oy and others down in Florida petitioned the Entomological Society of America, and the approved common name for this species now is the Tawny Crazy Ant. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the Tawny Crazy Ant, Nylanderia fulva. This is where we consider them located now, and you can see all of the researchers that work on these now consider all of these ants in Florida to also be Nylanderia fulva. This is a map populated by Joe McGowan from Mississippi State. You can see again the first record down here was in Miami-Dade County in '53. It wasn't around the 2000s. You can see they started becoming problems. The first ants that I ever saw were in, and actually it doesn't have a blue mark on here, Ascension Parish, Gonzales, Louisiana. We found them in Alabama in 2014, and there's a brand new population that just popped up into Georgia. Apparently they're moving along the interstates in Georgia, coming up from Jacksonville, Florida. This is about what the ants look like. You can see their size here in relation to a penny. The queens are larger than the workers, as with most other species. This particular ant can be identified by the long scape on the antenna here. Another characteristic is they have these standing long microceti on the back and the abdomen. They only have one node. They have a circle of the hairs at the tip of the abdomen around the acetocore. And the major characteristic that they have is this long femur, and it contributes to their erratic walking and behavior. When you see the video we have a little later, you can see that they behave and walk a little differently than other ants. This acetocore here too secretes formic acid, and you'll see here in a minute that that is important in their ability to defend themselves against other species. The workers also have a dense pubescence along their body. The queens, again, are larger, darker colored than the workers. And the male reproductives have wings, just like the female reproductives, but the male reproductives are really important in the identification of these species, Nylanderia fulva and Nylanderia pubens. What Gotzik and his crew determined was that pubens and fulva workers are basically morphologically indistinguishable from one another. I found that out when I brought some here to Charles Ray to identify for me, and he said, "Do you have a winged male?" And I had to go back and find a winged male at the site to bring back to get a confirmation that we did have Nylanderia fulva in Alabama. And it's the difference in the parameters, which are used for mating, on the tip of the abdomen of the males that you're able to make the final determination of where you have Nylanderia fulva or Nylanderia pubens. Now, what we've had too is the Tawny Crazy Ant has been confused with several other species. When I sent out word to my county agents that if you have ants in large numbers that behave differently and erratically, please send me samples so we can determine whether we have another infestation of Tawny Crazy Ants in Alabama. These were the two species that were mainly sent into the lab: the big-headed ants, Phydoly species, and Argentine ants. Now, the problem with Argentine ants with this identification is they have behaviors that are very similar to the Tawny Crazy Ant, in that they nest in moist places. They occur in large numbers, but their trails are different. They also tend aphids and other honeydew-producing insects. So these are easy to confuse. The main difference is in the large numbers that Tawny Crazy Ants occur in. When you see the video, you'll see that the numbers are just amazing. Let's talk a little bit about their biology. These are ants that have many nests. They're polydomous. They also have multiple queens. They're polygyne. Most of the nesting areas are primarily outdoors. They prefer moist habitats. You can see the bottom of a potted plant here where they were nesting underneath it. These guys are opportunistic nesters, and they will basically get under any object that has moisture underneath, and there will be a small nest there. So you're looking at mulch, shrubbery, pavements, trash, debris, rocks, soil, hay, underneath sidewalks. We found them first in Louisiana, basically coming out of a sign in front of a school that was made out of bricks and had a hollow wall on the inside. They can nest under tree bark. So there are many places that they can get where they can find a nest and find a place to live. These creatures are omnivorous, and their workers have very, very loose forages. Unlike Argentine ants, who will have tight foraging trails that fairly go in a similar line, these guys are broader, and they act more erratically. That's where they get their crazy ant name, from the way that they walk. Their foraging trails in the summertime during the cooler part of the day are plentiful, and basically sometimes you can't tell it's a foraging trail because there's so many ants in the environment and where you're going. These ants are very highly aggressive, and they occur in I got one very in there, but it's very, 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 very large colonies. They are known to displace other ant species, including the imported fire ant. What Ed LeBrun in Texas found was that in a very simple experiment that he conducted, he took clear fingernail polish and covered the acetopore of the crazy ant. That's the tip of the abdomen that I talked about that secreted formic acid. And if you put fire ants and crazy ants together and the acetopore was closed, the fire ants actually overtook the crazy ants and became dominant. But if the acetopore was closed and they could not secrete formic acid, if they could secrete formic acid, the fire ants were defeated in their aggression. Basically, what was happening is that the crazy ants secrete formic acid, sort of spread it on themselves like you would sunscreen. And when fire ants attack, they use their stingers to shoot venom at other ants, and it's caustic to the other ants. And this formic acid basically counteracts the caustic properties of the fire ant venom, and the fire ants are then overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the crazy ants. So they're ecologically dominant where they are, and again, they do monopolize the food resources. Now, we found winged alates in these. But even though we have, no one has ever seen a mating flight of the crazy ant. Most other ant species are spread when the male and female reproductives fly up into the air, mate, and the new queens fall to the ground to start a new nest. But this has not been seen in the Tawny Crazy Ant. But they are transported easily from place to place, and we are the primary reason these guys move from place to place in the environment. What Ed LeBrun has shown in Texas, this is a screenshot from his video, Rise of the Crazy Ants, is that on their own, these ants will only move 100 to 200 feet a year. You can see the blue line here was the line that he had in the fall of 2009, the fall of 2010. They had only moved out a couple of 100 yards from there. 2012, they moved a little bit further. But since they don't have a mating flight, they move in amoeba-like fashion, and they move in very, very small chunks. So we are the primary movers of this, which is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to my producers in Alabama. And again, wherever they're located, they have tended to displace the fire ants in that area. So that is, I guess, one of the benefits, but I've heard that some of the people in Texas that have crazy ants in the environment would much rather have their fire ants back. One of the key points here in one of Ed's studies, he showed that within a year of colonizing an area, the crazy ants attain numerical abundances here in the United States of up to 2 orders of magnitude, or over 100 times greater than the other ants in the system combined. So you can see these guys can come into an area and take it over fairly quickly. And the other key point is these ants are very, very difficult to control. Joe, if you can play the video now, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Go ahead and stop sharing your screen. You're still have it shared.
Screen. Okay, stop. How about that?
Here we go.
What you're seeing here, and this is a good shot, is white vinyl siding that is piled up on the ground. You can see they have broad foraging trails that are diverse. This video is not speeded up. This is the actual speed of these guys in the field. Every time we've tried to get pictures of these, we've had dark backgrounds and have not been able to get a good shot like this. I believe this is Tom Rasberry and some of his cohorts in Texas that took this video, but I did get it from Paul Nestor. You can see that between each sheet of the vinyl siding, the ants are nesting. They're nesting in large numbers. We actually have the video turned off due to the language, the sound that the gentlemen are using as they look at these. And you can see on his foot there, they get on you just that fast. They'll climb up your legs in very short order and will be all over you and everything else if you walk out in amongst them. Okay. Am I back, Joe?
Yes, your presentation is back.
Okay. So what kind of problems do these guys cause? Well, basically general aesthetics. If you have these around your house and you've actually treated for them, you can see dead ants piled up everywhere. They're around the outside of the house, in the corners, at doorways. Wherever you put insecticide, they will die. They cause problems in the industry. They tend to get in electrical boxes and electrical circuits a lot. You're looking here, if you've got golf courses, places like this, telephone lines. Actually, the site where we found them in Mobile, Alabama, we went next door to the shipping company that was there, walked out, told him while we were there. He said, yes, last week we had to call the pest control company to spray the box because they had shorted out our front gate and we were having to open it manually. One of the places you might not think these would cause a problem is in airports. If they short out landing lights on an airport, they could cause major problems. We've had that trouble with fire ants before. They get indoors. And of course, no one wants this inside their home. This is inside of a tub in a bathroom here. You can see any crack and crevice they will use to get inside your home. They cause problems on the exterior areas on a Section 18 label I will show you in a minute that's being used in Texas. One of the pieces of information there is sweep up dead ants before applying second application so you can make sure you get a good treatment on the substrate. So on the outside here, you can see large numbers of ants. Excuse me. And agriculture is another problem we're going to have with these ants. Down in the bottom here, you see a gentleman spraying aphids in a pecan orchard. These particular ants are already in pecan orchards in Texas, and aphids are a major problem in pecans. Basically, what will happen is if we get these ants in there and they start defending the aphids, it will create more sprays. Now, I don't know if they're in hay fields in Texas, but I do know that Danny McDonald at Sam Houston State did a study with some hay bales, and he broke open some hay bales that were infested with Tawny Crazy Ants. And if you're familiar with hay bales, they have between 8 and 12 pads of hay on the inside. So Danny took apart the hay bales and took each pad, which is about 4 to 6 inches wide, and beat it on plastic. And within each pad, not within each bale, there were at least an average of 8 queens. That's not including the workers. So if you put that hay bale back together, you're looking at transporting 80 to 100 plus queens if you move a hay bale that is covered with crazy ants on the inside. On the bottom right here, you'll see Flowerwood Nursery. This is down in Mobile County, Alabama. This site is 10 miles away from our location in Alabama. Flowerwood Nursery has over 100 acres in production here at this site. You can see some of their facilities on the picture above here. And the other industry that we have that this will cause problems, that's a big industry down in South Alabama, is the turf grass industry. I was in Louisiana last week, and a young lady down there said, yes, my mama got those last week, and we had to call the pest control operator. I said, do you happen to know how long she's had them? She said, oh, yes, they just replaced the turf in her yard the week before. And so the turf grass producers down there in Louisiana had actually delivered an infestation into this lady's yard. So this can be a very big problem with the nursery industry and the turf grass industry, because we know that when fire ants first came in, these are the two industries that helped spread fire ants across the southeast. So you can see these are going to be a major problem. You can look at about 3 inches deep outside of the homes. So let's take a look at some of the research and what we've tried to do to work with crazy ants and how well it's worked. Paul Nestor has worked in this pecan orchard in Manville, Texas. They have crazy ants there. They're in the electrical boxes at the barn. You can see here on the top right where they're actually nesting inside the old pecan hulls on the ground. They pulled away bark on the tree. You can see brood here. They're nesting on the side of the tree. And if you put your hand down where they're walking, within seconds, they will cover your hand like you see here on the bottom left. So what Paul and them did, they went out and, oh, Joe, let's go to the next one here. I forgot that one was here. Let me stop showing my screen. And you can show the video. You can see the ants crawling up and down the tree here. They're actually carrying brood up and down to small nests inside the bark. Basically, they're going up and tending the aphids in this nursery. And the problem with this is most of the products that we're going to be using to do this are neonicotinoids, the most effective ones. And, you know, we're having problems with those now with bees. So we need to find some good answer for these ants in their environment to not do that. Are we back now, Joe?
Yes, we are.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. I thought I stopped this one. There we go. So what they did in the orchard is they provided 2 treatments. They did the first with chlorpyrifos, the second with lambda-cyhalothrin, and they had an untreated area. And what they did was they put out 12 hot dogs. And I'll show you a picture of this in a minute. Hot dogs are used for baits for several different ant species, and they work fairly well for the crazy ant. And after the treatment, about a month afterward, out of 12 hot dogs, they had no total ants and no hits. So in the chlorpyrifos treatment. In the lambda-cyhalothrin treatment, they had one hot dog that had ants on it, a total of 10 ants. And in the untreated, you can see the ants were still very active, and they were collecting a lot of them there. So you can put out treatments, and you can knock back the workers, but that's about all you do at that point in time. So let's go to a test that Faith Oy from the University of Florida put in a Navy fueling depot in Jacksonville, Florida. This is what the inside of the hull looked like at the Navy depot. You can see this is probably unacceptable in any environment. But what they did was they took pre-treatment counts here early October. By October 20th, after the treatment, you can see that the treatment, and this was a pyrethroid, had knocked down the ants considerably. But again, 2 weeks later, the ant numbers are beginning to come back up. Now, what we see in most of the treatments that we do is that as the temperatures start to get colder, the control numbers of ants tend to drop down too. So you can see here, it looks like the treated area is doing a good job of control, but is that because of the treatment or just because the ant numbers are coming down at this time? So you can see a trend on most of our graphs after this that during the cooler weathers, the ant numbers are decline somewhat on their own. So why do we get such short control when we do this? We spray outside. Well, number one, ants die, cover up the treated area, and they walk over. Most of the time, too, our barrier is too small. Most products that are used for control around homes that are not sprayed in the yards, the directions say spray 1 foot, 2 foot up, or 1 foot, 2 foot out. This is not a big enough barrier for these guys. Most of these products, too, pyrethroids, only last several weeks to a month or so in the field, and they only kill workers. So if the workers just die before they get back, none of this gets taken back to the queens, and the queens are still laying eggs. They're still reproducing. And in addition to this, most of our pyrethroids are repellent products also. Okay, this is my complicated graph from Faith. This was a test that she put out, and you can tell up here in the right-hand corner, it was a sunny but undisclosed location in Jacksonville, Florida. The purple line up here is the control. And you can see that the numbers from June until September remain fairly constant across here, between upper 60s to lower 80s in numbers of ants. The treated area is in purple with spray alone. I mean, not purple, excuse me, green. And you can see that initially these numbers were knocked down, but then they came back up, and they're not much lower than the controls throughout the season. And there were repeated applications in here, and you can see slight drops after that. The reason I have this graph in here is that in some areas they also put out baits. And it seems that in the areas where the baits were applied, that the numbers stayed much lower. In fact, about a threefold reduction here in keeping the numbers down. So what they did was to take baits, since you can't broadcast these baits and leave them out like a fire ant bait, and I believe they did baits for this. What Faith and them did was to take this product and put it in enclosed containers. You can see these are rodent bait stations here, and filled it up with bait so it was protected from the rain and from the heat, and it would last longer, and they were able to come pick it up. And it did help somewhat. But the problem with baits is these. These ants are not only sweet feeders, they're protein feeders, and they're lipid feeders. And the problem is these guys diet switch. So you can't put out one bait and expect it to work the whole season, because these guys regularly change what they want to take back to mound. Most of the times when we're working with ants like this, such as fire ants, they're lipid feeders. All of our baits for fire ants are lipids. They tend to take them back, and they tend to do well. Most of your indoor ants are sweet feeders, so you can put out baits and they work well for them. But since these guys switch, we can't put a bait out and assume that they're going to pick it up. When I was down in Louisiana and putting out that fire ant test that I mentioned earlier, I walked over and looked and said, you know, I've never seen anyone beat fire ants to the bait before, and the crazy ants were picking up bait much faster than the fire ants. So I recommended to the people at the school that maybe later they should spread some more of this bait for the crazy ants, and they never picked it up again for the rest of that summer. Liquid baits do seem to work some, but the problem is, and Faith has worked with these down in Florida, is these guys consume up to a quart a day. So if a pest control operator or someone's going out, they're difficult to control. You have to maintain them every day, and the baits that do tend to work are expensive. So we're having difficulties finding some type of bait that these guys might use at this present time. Let's move to Texas. They have moved into neighborhoods and homes there. Paul Nestor went in and did a area-wide study. Basically, the numbers you see here, he has an inner circle of hot dogs that he put out here. He put out another group of hot dogs in an inner perimeter. He put them out on the perimeter, and then he collected information on the controls on the outside area here. What they used there was Termidor. It is labeled for use in Texas for ants on the original label that you see here, and you can spray it 1 foot up and 1 foot out. And again, I mentioned earlier that these barriers are too small for this, and you're only allowed 2 applications per year with Termidor also. So what Texas has done and what Mississippi and I believe Louisiana have done is to get a Section 18 label for this product. This label must be in hand if you use it, and again, only 2 applications per year are allowed. But what it allows is it changes the application rate to 3 foot up on the structure and 10 foot out on the ground area. The sidewalk is not included in this area. What they also put out in this area that I showed you on the map is Alpine WSG, which is dinotefuran. So they did a yard treatment, and they treated the homes with Termidor. They knew fipronil would work. Tom Rasberry, who's been fighting these for quite a while in Texas, one of his main products that he uses is Top Choice, which is granular fipronil in homeowners' lawns. So they treated the areas in the yards here with the Alpine WSG, 3 foot up, 10 foot out on the homes. They put out their hot dogs. This is what the hot dogs will look like out in the field. They counted, we use a rating, after about 100 ants on this hot dog, you can't count anymore. Basically, you put 100 plus. So let's take a look and see what they found. Again, with the control, they started in August and treated, ended in October. You can see that the ant numbers decline as the temperatures get cooler. On the perimeter, the ants were knocked down very fast, and these are numbers of ants on a hot dog average on the side here. You can see the ant numbers were knocked down fairly fast, but they began to rebound somewhat on the perimeter, and about 3 weeks later, they were almost up to the control again. They had better success on the inner circle and the circle in the very middle of the property. And the ant number stayed down fairly well with this whole area treatment. But if you look at the number of hot dogs that had at least 1 ant on them in the control area, every time they put a hot dog out, at least 1 ant came to it. Along the perimeter area, they didn't get as much control. Even though there weren't a large number of ants on these hot dogs, ants were still coming back to the hot dogs fairly quickly. And by 3 weeks, they were almost all getting hit again. Again, in the middle, you get a fast knockdown, and even though you don't have large numbers of ants, by the 3rd week, you're starting to go back up to where you're getting at least 50% of the hot dogs with at least 1 ant that are on them. So even though they're not foraging as large of numbers, they are still coming in and foraging at this point in time. What they found out in Texas, too, that if you've got a home that looks like this, it's fairly easy to cover it around the outside. You can spray and you can treat the areas, and you can get the product down into the soil where you need it to control the ants. But most of our homes look more like this. And it's very difficult in areas like this to be able to spray and to get enough product out. We've had to go to using larger gallonages of water to make sure that you soak the mulch to get it down in there where you can get the ants. Paul has told me that he has several people in Texas that have basically re-landscaped their lawns where they have crazy ants to help keep them out of the homes. The other thing that we're having to go to, and for the past 10 years, I do school IPM, and I have told my pest control operators that work in schools that there's really not a pest that they have in schools that requires them to carry in a spray container and spray anything in schools before. There are enough bait products out there, and you can work with the schools, that you can do your indoor pest control without spraying. With these ants, we may have to go back to the baseboard crack and crevice sprays to help slow down their encroachment into the homes. Okay, let's go to crazy ants here in Alabama now. This is where they're located. This is Mobile, Alabama, right here. You can see the Alabama River runs into the Mobile Bay here. They're located just on the bay. The reason I started giving my talks is that just over the line here in Mississippi in Gulfport, where they have the casinos and everything, they had found crazy ants there. And I assumed probably that some family would go over there, have a good weekend at Biloxi, would buy something at Home Depot, see some fairly nice looking flowers, carry them home, and that about a year or so later, the crazy ant population would bloom enough that I would have a homeowner calling up and say, we have a problem. That's not what happened here in Alabama. Our site is located in an industrial shipping channel here, just off the port. These are fairly large shipping companies around the area. This particular family here had 8 acres that they did not want to sell, and they have not sold. It is basically prime native habitat here with about a 1 acre opening in the middle where their home is. The industry on the left is Resolve Industries. If you're familiar with the Costa Concordia that wrecked on the reef in Greece several years back, once they floated it up, this is the company that towed the ship away. This is Cork Industries on the left. So what I'm thinking happened in Alabama is these ants did not come from anywhere but somewhere in the shipyard. They came off a ship in a container. They looked around in the areas in the shipyards, wasn't very habitable, and they moved into this native vegetation and made themselves at home right there. This area is fairly completely covered from one end to the other in crazy ants. The family does not want to move at this time. The older gentleman is about 80 years old at this point in time. His daughter, who's retired, lives with him at this point in time. The grandchildren come here and play a good bit. They have a nice pool there. You can see the crazy ants that are caught in their pool filter. This is outside of their garage. I mentioned that they're on Mobile Bay. The lady that owns this property told me she sprays malathion at least once a week and sometimes more often to kill the crazy ants out here. And you can see the dead crazy ants in the drainage away from the garage here on the right, and the swing where the children play outside. So it's not the best environment for them to have to spray this much on their property. If you think this is a fairly small area, this is a quarter here. You can see the dead ants along the concrete here. On either side of this pile of dead ants, there were ants moving back and forth. They were still trailing up to the house at this point in time. You can see, I don't know whether the ants or the malathion was the cause of the death of the earthworm and the insects, but there are consequences of spraying this much. This is another building she had toward the end of the property. It's next door to a shed that had a tarp on the ground that was about 10 foot by 20 foot. That was a complete nest from one end of the tarp to the other. I found out from the county agent's office that in 2013, the year before we found the ants down there, this lady had brought in a 5-gallon bucket of dead ants to the county agent's office. And nobody thought something was a little amiss with that many ants coming in. This pile right here is about a third of a 5-gallon bucket if we were to sweep it up. And you can see why the label on Termidor with the Section 18 label says sweep up dead ants before making second application. So what we did was we went back to her site. We did a couple of things. First, we worked with our horticulture experiment station in Mobile, and they prepared some pots for us. We had a control pot, a pot with one of the fire ant treatments that they use on the station, and a second pot of a stronger fire ant treatment on the station. We placed those near the entrance of this property, where the ants were very active, and hoping to see if the fire ant treatments would help keep the ants out of the pots. What we found out, since I've not worked with nursery products before, is that the pots keep getting turned over. We either have raccoons, possums, dogs, or some form of animal that keeps turning our pots over. So that part of the experiment we're going to have to repeat this spring. So I will work with John Olive down at the Mobile Horticultural Experiment Station and set that back up again, him and Jeremy Pickens. The other thing we did is we took bait stations similar to what you saw from Faith Oy earlier, but rather than putting one bait in there, we put 3 separate ant baits, Amdro ant block. We used one of the fire ant baits, and we used Max Force Complete. Max Force Complete is a protein bait. The Amdro ant block is a sweet bait, and the fire ant bait is a lipid bait. Again, with our low area here and rains in Mobile, and if you don't know, Seattle is not the wettest city in the United States. It is second. Mobile is number 1. All of our rat boxes ended up getting flooded, so our bait part of the study did not work very well either. But we talked with Syngenta and got some a product called Aerolon. The active ingredient is indoxacarb. It got a brand new label this past summer that allowed indoxacarb to be used in the landscape as well as around the homes. The nice part about indoxacarb, it is what we call a probate. When it gets on an insect or is eaten by an insect, it is not toxic as such until they metabolize it into the toxic components. So what it can do is be carried back to the nest and distributed to the queens, we hope, in hope of not only taking care of some of the workers, but knocking out and reducing some of the queens on the property. We set out hot dog baits around the home. We set another set of hot dog baits in the center of the property, and we set a third set of hot dog baits around the perimeter. And we basically tried to spray all of the yard areas that we could under here. We asked the lady and her family to clean up as much in her yard as she could as far as mulch, anything lying on the ground, because at this site there's moisture under about everything, and everything we turned up on the ground at this site that was touching the ground and had moisture under it had a nest underneath it. What we found is this: unlike the others, we did not count ants. We rated our ants. Number 1 here is 20 ants on a hot dog. Number 2 is 40 ants on a hot dog. Number 3 is 60. Number 4 is 80. And number 5 is 100 plus. You can see our initial counts here. Everything was well above 90 plus ants. What we have noticed this year, and we've got data until December, she told me last year at this site with the cold weather that her ant numbers went down. In the wooded area out there where we're taking our control data, the ant numbers have not declined this year. We're getting data actually this week again down there. But you can see the Aerolon has done a good job, not only in the center, which is the orange line here, and in the around the house, which is the blue line, but even along the perimeter, the ant numbers have still stayed down low. We plan on collecting data on this on into the spring, and once the ants rebound, we're going to come back in and maybe do a second treatment this spring. I also want to work with Robert Puckett, Paul Nestor in Texas, and Faith down in Florida to see when their crazy ants begin activity in the spring, and to see if the aeroline may have delayed their resurgence in the spring due to the fact that maybe we got some of those queens and knocked them back. But we'll see. So what's our management strategy with this? Again, what they found in Colombia and what they found in Texas is that cultural controls are where we need to begin. We need to remove their harborage, things in the yard. I know if they got into my yard around my barn at the house, I would have to do a complete rework because of the things I have piled up outside. But fallen limbs, rocks, leaf litter, anything that's sitting on the ground that is not absolutely necessary needs to be picked up. These cultural methods are going to need to include altering moisture in the landscapes, especially if you're looking at golf courses, turf places, things like that. They do prefer humid, wet conditions, so any irrigation leaks, any pipe leaks, anything like that to improve drainage to get moisture off of your property is going to help. We're going to need to eliminate food sources, or at least manage them somewhat, and this is going to include honeydew-producing hemipterans, and hopefully we can do some of this with products containing systemic insecticides that are usually good for these type of sucking insects. And again, temporary buffer zones, which we're creating around this woman's house in Mobile, using contact insecticides applied to the grounds and surfaces. But again, these usually get breached fairly often. If you saw her property, there was the building in the middle that I showed you that had the tarp underneath it. We were not able to spray under that tarp. So we slowed them down in that building, but we do have a residual amount of ants right in the middle of the property that will be able to come out this spring. So our management strategy, especially here in Alabama, is to inspect anything that's being moved from an infested area for ants before transferring it to a new site. I've talked with my Turf Pest Association about sod. I've talked with them about mulch, nursery plants. Not only before it goes out, but anything coming in. One family actually brought them home, and it's been documented in a styrofoam cooler from a camping trip. So we want to make sure that anytime we bring anything new onto our sites, we take a look at it. I even went and spoke last week to our right-of-way group, the people that maintain highways and power lines, things of this nature. They always leave their equipment parked on the side of the road at night and go back and start in the middle and the next morning mowing again. And one of the things I wanted to remind them was that once they park their equipment to clean it off on the top, if they leave grass, straw, things like that where they mowed in the day on top of the mowers, ants can move into it during the night and they can move it and transfer them from one to the other. So there are a lot of different places we're having to look to take a look at moving, preventing movement from these guys. And again, IPM, prevention of movement, are the things that we want to do with this. And Joe, if you have any questions, I'll share my webcam again and be glad to answer them.
We do have plenty of time for questions. I'll go ahead and start you off with one.
Okay.
So you mentioned a woman who recently had turf installed.
Yes.
And actually, before I do that, if anyone has a question on the GoToWebinar control panel at the bottom, there's a place where you can enter your question, or you can raise your hand and I'll unmute your mic here in just a minute. So you mentioned a woman who had turf installed recently, and she discovered within a week that she had Tawny Crazy Ant.
Yes.
Is there any strategy that they could use in the case where they've caught it early enough that they could eradicate that small infestation, or is it pretty much out of the bag once that turf hit the ground?
No, with her finding her infestation that early in that localized of an area, they have an opportunity to take care of that infestation. That's the advantage of catching things early. You can knock them back.
Okay, we do have a question coming through from Anne-Marie Calcott. How is the Aerolon liquid bait applied?
We applied it with we had a 15-gallon sprayer we borrowed from John Olive at the horticultural experiment station down there. We calibrated it at his place and used a large volume when we put it out. And if you want to know the volume on that, I don't have it in my head right now, but I do have it in a file somewhere I can get for it if you wanted to know that.
Okay. What do you think the impact of Tawny Crazy Ant would be on the tropical islands? Similar to that of LFA?
Yeah. Their aggressive nature and the way they're able to deal with other ants, I've got a feeling on any tropical island they're going to be able to do the same too, that they are here. They're going to be invasive and disrupt things for a while.
I'd like to thank you all very much for attending this webinar as part of the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. The recording of this webinar and the others in the series will be available at youtube.com/Southern IPM Center.